Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character?
Hi besties, I am Dhruvyata Baskan Lashari with Corventa. Today we should discuss about the
Blake Lively's journey into what would become one of the most shocking and unbelievable turns in recent Hollywood legal memory did not begin with a dramatic revelation but rather with the slow, tense buildup of a star caught in the delicate balance between celebrity perfection and human vulnerability. A story that at first looked like just another dispute involving contracts, reputations, and press management but soon spiraled into something much larger when whispers of signal chats began to hover over the proceedings, transforming a straightforward legal battle into a cultural event where fans, lawyers, journalists, and rival celebrities all became obsessed with what secrets might be hidden in encrypted conversations. And in order to truly understand the magnitude of what was at stake, one has to go back to the foundation of Blake's Hollywood identity, because for more than a decade she had been seen as the embodiment of balance, the actress who moved effortlessly between blockbuster roles, high-fashion campaigns, and the enviable image of a stable family life with Ryan Reynolds. Their marriage painted as the perfect counterpoint to Hollywood's many tales of divorce and scandal. Yet beneath the surface, such an image always comes with pressure. As rivals seek to puncture the illusion and gossip reporters hunt for the one thread that might unravel the entire narrative. And when Blake became entangled in disputes involving projects, alleged behind the scenes, manipulations and whispered feuds with industry figures including Taylor Swift's inner circle and directors like Justin Baldoni, the situation escalated beyond image management into full-blown legal confrontation, setting the stage for the courtroom drama that would capture global attention. A drama whose heartbeat was secrecy, because in an industry where every email can be subpoenaed, every text leaked, and every careless DM turned into tabloid fodder, the sanctity of encrypted apps like Signal became the new lifeline for celebrities and their teams, a place where they could speak bluntly, strategize ruthlessly, and plot moves without fear of discovery, or so they thought, because the myth of unbreakable secrecy would soon collide with the reality of legal procedure and human error, creating an environment where Blake's fate seemed both precarious and strangely fortified, as if she were walking a tightrope where one slip could send her career crashing down while one misstep by. Her opponents could crown her the victor in ways no publicist could engineer. And thus, in the opening act of this saga, the drama unfolds in hushed courtrooms, dimly lit strategy meetings, and breathless media speculation, with her attorneys arguing relentlessly to frame the case around technicalities, evidence thresholds, and privacy protections, because they knew that if the word signal became more than a whisper, the narrative could change forever. And for weeks the tension simmered, with rival lawyers hinting darkly at conversations that might implicate Blake or her allies, trying to sow doubt in the court of public opinion, while entertainment reporters latched onto the phrase secret chats like bloodhounds, creating headlines that magnified the stakes, and online commentators, always eager to elevate gossip into gospel, speculated endlessly about what those chats might reveal. Was it just routine banter, or did they contain explosive discussions about feuds, alliances, or even strategies to undermine competitors? And Blake, caught in the middle, presented the face of calm, walking into hearings dressed with her usual poise, projecting confidence, but privately shaken by the relentless pace of discovery, where every document request and every whisper of evidence felt like a ticking time bomb, because even if she had nothing to hide, the perception of hidden communications could be enough to damage her reputation. Yet, ironically, this perception of vulnerability was also creating the conditions for her eventual boost, because her attorneys, skilled in both courtroom procedure and the theater of public relations, understood that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from suppressing whispers but from allowing opponents to overplay their hand. And as the days unfolded, that is exactly what began to happen. For the opposing lawyers, eager to score a dramatic point, became reckless, filing documents that referenced Signal without properly sealing them, speaking too freely about evidence that was supposed to remain confidential. And in their eagerness to cast suspicion on Blake, they planted the seeds of their own undoing, because the court, the media, and the public suddenly saw not an incriminated actress but a celebrity being recklessly targeted. Her private life dragged into the spotlight through sloppy legal maneuvers, and this shift in perception marked the first stage of Blake's unbelievable boost, one that would culminate in the Dramatic exposure of signal chats not as evidence against her but as proof of the opposition's carelessness, their inability to respect boundaries, and their willingness to gamble credibility for headlines. And while the chats themselves remained shrouded in mystery, the very fact that they were mishandled became a turning point, because now the narrative was no longer "what is Blake hiding?" but rather, why are her rivals so desperate that they cannot even safeguard the legal process? And in this transformation lay the real power of her position. As supporters rallied to her side, commentators questioned the ethics of her adversaries, and the court itself looked with skepticism at the tactics being employed against her, which in turn gave her legal team the leverage they needed to argue not just for the dismissal of certain claims but for a broader reconsideration of the entire case's credibility, an outcome that no one, not even her most ardent fans, could have predicted at the outset, but that now seemed inevitable as the saga of the signal chats began to take on a life of its own, feeding headlines, inspiring memes, and reminding Hollywood that in the age of encrypted communication, the greatest danger is not always what is said but how it is mishandled. And so by the time this first act concludes, Blake Lively is no longer just a defendant or a celebrity under scrutiny, but the central figure in a cautionary tale about secrecy, exposure, and the fine line between legal warfare and public relations disaster. A tale that sets the stage for even more explosive developments to come, where the unbelievable would become the undeniable, and the woman once thought to be on the defensive would find herself holding the unexpected advantage. Her so-called weakness transformed into a weapon by the very people who sought to destroy her, and thus part 1 closes with the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The court of law and the court of public opinion colliding, and Blake standing, for the moment, stronger than ever in the midst of chaos. When the curtain lifted on what would soon be described as the most jaw-dropping blunder in recent legal memory, the world saw a courtroom that had already been tense and expectant suddenly ignite with the kind of energy usually reserved for dramatic film finales. Because the slip-up that allowed Blake Lively's enemies to stumble into disaster was not a single event but the culmination of weeks of reckless ambition, mounting pressure, and an almost theatrical overconfidence from lawyers who believed they had secured the ace card only to reveal, in the most public way imaginable, that they had overplayed their hand, and in this moment the word signal, once whispered only in corners and blogs, became the headline screamed across global outlets, its exposure transforming the narrative from speculative drama into a full-blown scandal. And for Blake herself, what had been a battle for survival became an unexpected opportunity to seize control of the storyline. For as soon as the opposing counsel failed to properly redact and protect sensitive references in their filings, those signal chats slipped from secrecy into the public domain. Not in their entirety but in fragments tantalizing enough to inflame curiosity and devastating enough to show the recklessness of those who released them, and the irony was palpable, because what had been intended as a dagger aimed at Blake's image quickly turned into a shield that fortified her position, the world now viewing her not as a manipulator hiding secret conversations but as a victim of legal malpractice, a celebrity whose privacy had been violated by opponents who were too eager for headlines. And in the hours following the exposure, the news cycle went into overdrive, with entertainment blogs posting banner alerts, mainstream outlets commissioning instant legal analysis, and social media users flooding platforms with memes, reactions, and theories about what the signal chats contained. And though the actual content was not fully laid out, snippets hinted at discussions of strategies, rivalries, and personal grievances. The mere fact that these messages were dragged into the open without proper authorization was enough to create a frenzy, because fans on one side argued that this was proof of the lengths her rivals would go to destroy her, while critics insisted that the very existence of these chats hinted at deeper schemes, and thus the debate raged in real time, each side convinced that the revelation validated their perspective. Yet what few realized immediately was that the true impact of this slip-up was not in what the chats said but in how they were revealed. For the court is built not only on evidence but on procedure, and when procedure is violated, the credibility of the violator collapses, giving Blake's attorneys precisely the leverage they had prayed for, and within hours of the mistake they filed motions, arguments, and emergency requests, demanding that the exposure be recognized as a breach of due process, calling for sanctions against the opposing counsel, and asserting that their client had been irreparably harmed by the reckless disclosure, a position that resonated with the judge, who expressed visible frustration in hearings, admonishing the opposition for their carelessness and raising questions about the integrity of their case. And in this subtle but seismic shift the narrative turned, because suddenly it was not Blake on the defensive but her. Enemies scrambling to justify their actions, attempting to spin the exposure as minor or accidental while the world saw it as a major collapse. And the media amplified this perception relentlessly, with panelists on legal talk shows describing it as one of the most catastrophic self-inflicted wounds a legal team could suffer, while gossip sites treated the signal chats like forbidden fruit, analyzing every word of the leaked fragments, speculating about their hidden meanings, and building a mythology around them that only increased Blake's visibility, transforming her into the epicenter of the entertainment world's attention. A position that carried risks but also tremendous power, because in the realm of celebrity litigation, being at the center of conversation often means controlling the narrative, and Blake, through her attorneys and her careful public persona, began to do exactly that, projecting calm dignity while her opponents unraveled. And every time she appeared in public, after the slip-up, whether at a courthouse step or a social function, photographers captured her with an aura of resilience, while commentators praised her ability to rise above the chaos, contrasting it with the fumbling desperation of those who had exposed her chats. And slowly but surely the perception shifted from Blake caught in scandal to Blake triumphs over reckless attack, an evolution that would have seemed impossible only weeks before, and behind the scenes her lawyers capitalized on this momentum, negotiating from a position of strength, knowing that the opposition's credibility was weakened and that any jury or judge would now view their evidence with suspicion. Because once a legal team is known for mishandling confidential material, everything they touch is tainted by doubt, and this became the foundation for Blake's big boost, the unbelievable twist that turned a moment of potential vulnerability into a resounding advantage. And yet the saga did not end with legal filings and motions, for the cultural ripple effects were just as significant, with fans across the globe rallying to her side, hashtags trending in her defense, and Hollywood insiders reevaluating alliances, some distancing themselves from her rivals, others quietly reaching out to offer support, recognizing that the tide had turned, and even those once skeptical of her image found themselves admiring her ability to endure, adapt, and rise in the face of invasive exposure. And perhaps the most striking impact was on her supposed feuds, because where once names like Taylor Swift or Selena Gomez had been whispered in the same breath as rivalry, now those narratives seemed muted compared to the thunderous spectacle of the signal chats. And in this way Blake's image was not just preserved but paradoxically strengthened, her position reframed from one of secrecy and suspicion to one of resilience and unfairly targeted victimhood, a transition that only a few weeks earlier would have seemed unthinkable. And so part 2 concludes with the realization that the slip-up was more than a mistake. It was a pivot point, a moment when the entire trajectory of the case shifted, when Blake Lively's story transformed from defensive survival into offensive advantage, and when the exposure of signal chats, intended to damage her, instead became the very weapon that fortified her, leaving the opposition scrambling, the media buzzing, and the world waiting for the next act in a drama that was already unlike anything Hollywood or the legal world had ever seen. The fallout from the exposure of the signal chats was not a quiet aftershock but a full-scale earthquake that sent tremors across Hollywood, the legal community, and the global audience that had been following every twist in Blake Lively's case. Because once the opposing lawyer's blunder became the central storyline, the dominoes began to fall in every direction, leaving reputations shattered, alliances shaken, and Blake herself standing unexpectedly tall in the ruins of what had once been a carefully orchestrated campaign against her. And it is in this aftermath that the true scale of her unbelievable boost comes into focus. For the court of law may move slowly with motions, hearings, and rulings, but the court of public opinion delivers verdicts instantly. And in that arena Blake was declared the clear victor almost overnight, her narrative shifting from suspicion to vindication as media headlines, late-night talk shows, and even rival celebrities began framing her as the woman who had survived an unfair ambush, a celebrity who endured invasive exposure only to emerge stronger. And as this perception hardened, the very people who had once tried to distance themselves from her began drifting back, with publicists advising their clients that standing beside Blake was now a safer bet than being associated with those who had recklessly violated her privacy, a dynamic that rewrote the power map of Hollywood's social circles. And nowhere was this more visible than in the shifting tone of journalists who only weeks before had questioned her integrity but were now writing sympathetic profiles about her resilience, her composure, and the way she managed to turn humiliation into empowerment. Articles that blended legal analysis with human interest storytelling, transforming her into both a legal survivor and a cultural heroine. And while Blake herself remained publicly measured, speaking only in carefully prepared statements about respect for the legal process and the importance of privacy, her silence became more powerful than words, for every photograph of her walking calmly into a courthouse contrasted with the frantic, defensive statements of her opponents. And this visual juxtaposition was enough to cement the idea that she was rising above while they were sinking. And behind the scenes the fallout was even more dramatic, with rival lawyers facing internal investigations, clients questioning their judgment, and Hollywood insiders whispering that the exposure had effectively ended careers, because in an industry where reputation is currency, being branded careless or reckless can be a death sentence. And this chaos gave Blake's legal team a battlefield advantage, because every misstep by the opposition was a step forward for them, and they used it to negotiate from a position of overwhelming strength, pushing for dismissals, sanctions, and even settlements, knowing that no judge or jury could now fully trust evidence tainted by such a glaring violation. And in this way the fallout not only protected Blake in the courtroom but also reframed her as a woman who had conquered a storm designed to destroy her. And yet the ripples extended far beyond legal filings, because in Hollywood, image is everything, and the boost she received in this moment was extraordinary, reshaping her public persona from a glamorous actress into a resilient icon, someone who had faced down betrayal, exposure, and scandal yet somehow turned the tables so completely that her rivals became the villains in the public eye, and fans across the world reinforced this new narrative with hashtags praising her strength, edits of her walking confidently into court set to triumphant music, and endless commentary about how she had managed to achieve what so few in Hollywood ever could. To be caught in scandal and come out not weaker but stronger, a transformation so complete that even those who had once doubted her now found themselves admiring her. And perhaps the most remarkable dimension of this fallout was how it neutralized her feuds, because where once gossip about tension with Taylor Swift, Selena Gomez, or even industry figures like Justin Baldoni had dominated online chatter, the Signal chat exposure overshadowed it all, reframing every rivalry as petty compared to the larger story of her survival, and in doing so it gave Blake the rarest gift in Hollywood: narrative control, the ability to define her story not through PR gimmicks but through the lived drama of a scandal-turned victory. And as weeks passed, the opposition could do little but stumble, their explanations ringing hollow, their credibility evaporating, while Blake's presence grew only more commanding, with magazines putting her on covers under headlines about resilience and redemption, industry insiders whispering that she had secured not only her image but her long-term leverage in Hollywood negotiations, and analysts noting that her case would likely be studied in law schools as an example of how procedural missteps can redefine outcomes. Yet beyond all the analysis and commentary lay a deeper truth: that the fallout was as psychological as it was practical, because for fans who had invested in her image, seeing her triumph was personal validation, and for rivals who had schemed against her, watching her rise was humiliation. And in this duality Blake's unbelievable boost became complete, her position no longer defined by defense but by dominance, her adversaries silenced not by a decisive piece of evidence but by their own recklessness. And so the story that began with whispers of secrecy and fears of exposure ends with a woman who has turned exposure into empowerment. A courtroom that now views her as wronged rather than guilty. A Hollywood that rallies to her side rather than whispers against her. And a global audience that will remember not the content of the Signal chats, but the catastrophe of their mishandling. A catastrophe that rewrote the narrative, crowned an unexpected victor, and ensured that Blake Lively's name would forever be associated not with scandalous downfall, but with one of the most spectacular rebounds in celebrity legal history. Making Part 3 not merely the conclusion of a courtroom saga but the transformation of a narrative into legend, where the fallout itself became the foundation of her strength and the final proof that sometimes the greatest boost comes not from what you hide, but from how you survive being exposed. Thanks for watching and subscribe my channel Coravanta for more updates.